Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. This episode is a companion piece to episode 4, and that was entitled Blood Oaths and Bar Tabs, Horror Conventions and Cinema Wasteland. Now, that episode was about the experiences and connections we make at horror conventions. Some of the people I met were gracious enough to sit in for an interview with me. In this episode, we interview Jon Kitley, who maintains his own website, Kitley's Crypt. That's Crypt with a K. He's also a regular columnist for HorrorHound Magazine and writes for Evilspeak Magazine. He's a lifetime lover of horror in both books and film, and he truly has an encyclopedic knowledge of horror from the 30s to the present. I'm in awe. I think you'll enjoy this interview. And my apologies for any difference in sound quality you may hear. This was taped live on location in a hotel room. Now, an interview from the abyss with Jon Kitley.
And we're here with Jon Kitley right now, and Kitley is the owner, operator, and head corpse of Kitley's Crypt, and I will definitely have a link for that for you. It's literature and basically horror reference books for the most part, and there's a lot of really great stuff that he's doing on that. And I wanted to talk with Jon today because we're here at Cinema Wasteland, and it is my first time here. One of the people that was instrumental in me getting to this place was Jon, and I always enjoy some of the conversations that we have about this. But, you know, when I talk about horror, and especially on this podcast, I talk about people's passions. What really makes me interested in what somebody has to say is just how much they're really engaged and how deep some of this love goes. And as I'll be talking about Cinema Wasteland, there's a ton of people who stay up really late to have some great conversations. But it all starts somewhere. So what was the seed for you that we went from going, well, I kind of like horror movies, I really kind of like reading, and you went, oh, you know, I'm going to follow something on this?
Well, I've been a horror fan pretty much my entire life, since, early days of 6 and 7 years old watching stuff on TV. But it wasn't until my early 20s that I guess I took it professional. I shouldn't say professionally because that would imply I get paid. I took it seriously. I became what I call a student of the genre. And that's at the point where I decided that I was going to try to learn as much as I can about the movies and about the people that made them. And this is pre-internet, so that meant you found reference books. So I started collecting any and all horror reference books that I could find, and just devouring them, learning about different movies. A lot of which at that time I never thought a prayer of being able to find them. Much different than the way it is now, and it just kind of went on from there. Then it come to a point where I'm so passionate about the genre that I'm not content with just being a fan. I had to get my opinion and my voice out there. So 1998 I started my website, Kitley's Crypt, that was basically just used as my soapbox to get reviews out, stuff that I thought was important in the genre. And yeah, that's been since 1998, and sometime in I don't remember when I started writing for HorrorHound, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, started my column, and again, using my column to try to get movies, get the attention of some movies to fans that probably have never heard of them before. So, and then doing conventions, I sell reference books because of that same passion that I have for them. I know it's a niche market, and people are usually interested in buying DVDs and T-shirts and stuff, but I'm still fighting the good fight, trying to get these books out there to help people, you know, ignite that passion, the same thing that I have, and to learn more about the genre, because the more you learn about it, the more it's going to open up doorways to different movies, and you're going to understand it better, and it makes it all around enjoyable.
Yeah. So you said student of the genre. What do you think was the thing that you most resonate with? That it could be anything, right? But horror really speaks to you.
Oh, it's always just even from a kid, from being a little kid. I always liked horror movies. I always liked the scary, the monsters. I never was scared by them. I related with them for some reason. I mean, you have to be on a couch with somebody for a long time before I think we would all figure that out. But I think a lot of us horror fans are. Let me explain it this way. Frankenstein is probably one of my top favorite films. One of the things that I think I relate to that is Frankenstein's creature as an outsider. Doesn't fit in with society as much as he might want to. We don't fit in normal society. As a horror fan, it's the same thing. We may look normal, some of us not so much, but we don't fit in with normal society. So we're always on that outsider, and I think that's one of the things that I gravitated towards horror films more and more, because that's family. Yeah. And the more and more people that you meet in the genre and that are like us, you do have this, you are normal. And it's the outsiders, it's the other people that are now the outsiders. So it was always comforting inside that genre, and learning more and more about it. It's just, that was the natural step.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about Frankenstein. It seems to me that children just get him.
Yeah.
And there's something very deep about that.
Right. They don't see him as a threat. Right. They see him as a child, as a misunderstood child. And they even relate to that because maybe they don't think they're being understood.
So, what about this convention? You go to a lot of conventions, but when I first met you, the one that you told me I had to come to was here in Strongsville, Ohio.
Yes.
What is it?
Cinema Wasteland is run by Ken Kish, and I've known Ken 20-something years, and I've met him at other conventions, and it was the big joke that Ken would complain about the current convention we were at, and I'm going to start my own convention one of these days. And we'd all laugh because it never happened. And the next convention would go around and we'd see Ken, and he'd be bitching about the show, and I'm going to start my own convention. And then it was at a Wizard World in 1999. We went up to Ken's table after we set up, and the son of a bitch handed me a flyer for the first Cinema Wasteland show, and we like, holy shit, he's really going to do it. And that was in September of 2000, and he's done them every year since then. And in 2004, he started doing the spring shows. So I think this is his 29th show. Yeah. It is like no other convention. It is the only convention that I know of that is still in the same hotel. It doesn't draw tens of thousands of people. It only draws 1,000, 2,000. But everybody coming through the door are diehard fans. They're hardcore. They're, like I said, students of the genre. They're not fly-by-night. They're not casually like horror fans. It's serious. We are really serious fans. So you can have a conversation with anybody here about the most obscure title, and everybody's going to know what you're talking about. And it's not, though, like an exclusive club where you can't come in and enjoy, but you will learn. This show is not about autographs. Like a lot of conventions these days, it's about meeting guests and the paying the stupid amount of prices for autographs. Cinema Wasteland is one of the true shows that still is about celebrating the movies and the people behind it. Yes, they do charge for autographs, but it is really kept at a minimum. But it's in celebration of the movies that we love and the people behind them. So it's not... The focus still is on what these conventions first started as. It's never changed. And I don't think hardly any convention else out there can still say that same thing. Ken still does what he wants to do, and he still holds true to what he wanted to do when he first started it.
Yeah. So you mentioned the convention, we have these like-minded people, and there's a lot of passion. People are pretty scholarly, and they can really go on great tangents. But it's only been around 15 years or so, as you're saying. What pre-internet, how did the Frankenstein kids, the ones that sat there and felt like outsiders from everybody, how'd you meet, and how did you connect?
Well, before the internet, it really was these conventions. Where you would come and you would just kind of hopefully strike up a conversation with someone or after hours in the bar, or just basically on chance. I know most of my friends, probably all of my friends, I've met at conventions. I've met through conventions like yourself and quite a few others, and we still remain friends to this day, years later. And it might only be that we see each other at these conventions. I've always made the comment that my convention family, and I'm closer to them than my real family. I see them. Some of these are fellow dealers that I see at every show. But even before the internet, we either met each other through conventions, or you would write letters to the magazines in response to an article, and hopefully someone would agree with you and decide to write you because of your letter. But now with the internet and Facebook and all that, God, it's so much easier to make connections with people. It's easier to build those bonds.
Happens really fast these days. How about, what do you think is the piece of horror? What's the thing that you like to see in a movie? What's the thing that you go, oh, now this is a good one?
Oh man, that's a tough one. It really depends on what I'm in for. I mean, I like all sorts of the genre, the subgenres. I love a good classic ghost story. I love really good gore when it's well done. But I guess at the essence, what we're all looking for, it really depends on what kind of movie you're looking for at the time. I would love to have a movie that has a good story, strong characters that suck you into the story, great special effects, not that you need them if you have a good story and good characters, and really try to show me something that I haven't seen before. I know that's harder and harder to do these days, but it's really tough. Sometimes I just want to see people get their heads blown off,
Right.
So it really varies on the mood. But if you have a really good story and really good acting and characters, you can do a lot with just that. That'll make up for bad lighting, bad effects. So it's really tough. It's really tough.
That's awesome. So you're talking about reference books. We talk a long time about our favorite movies and things. If you were having someone who was brand new coming in, they're just learning about horror, what are the 5 movies that you think they should do?
5 movies?
Yeah, 5 movies, 5 books, whatever you think would be an inspiration.
Well,
I know, tough, huh?
You're killing me on this one. For books, I don't know if I could narrow it down to 5, but what I would recommend is a movie guide book, some sort of a movie guide book, because the best thing you can do, especially if you're starting out, is get a checklist. You get a book that's, the top 100 films of all time. You don't have to agree with those, but it gives you a checklist. And you go through them, seen this one, okay, gotta see this one, and then you have a little need to find list. You go from there. Biographies are great because the more you learn about a particular actor or particular director, you're going to see their films differently than you did before, because you're going to know a little bit of background behind of what might have happened on that particular film. Those also add films to your your need to watch list, because they had a little part in this film, or you realize that they worked on this film and what they had to go through on that film, and crap, now I need to watch that film. And even if it's one you've seen, now I need to watch it again. So your watch list is going to grow no matter what. It's just anything that you can, the more you can learn about the genre and the people behind it, it's going to influence what you watch and how you watch them.
And see the influences of the people that you're watching.
Yeah, exactly. Because you see things differently. The more you know about it, it's not just watching it for the same reasons. You're gonna see a bigger picture, I guess, and that's the important part.
Movies, literature. Were both big passions for you? Do you do a lot of literature, like fiction?
When I started really getting into horror, I was as much into horror literature as I was film. At the time, I was working as a third shift security guard, and they didn't care what you did as long as you stayed awake. So I started reading, and I was reading 2 or 3 books a week, and just devouring anything and everything I can get into. One of the problems / benefits of being a completist is if I bought a book by, say, Stephen King, and I liked it, I have to find everything that Stephen King has written. If I bought a movie that was directed by, directed by Robert Wise, and I liked it, I have to find out whatever else this guy did. So it's almost like the spider web effect, where you're never satisfied, or you're never content with just what you had. You start to branch out, which is good, because then it leads and open doors into everything else. Once my son was born, my time for reading was taken away. A lot of that, I didn't have it, and at that point, the two paths started to really form, and the literature one was taking a lot more time to keep up with. The cost of hardcover books was starting to hit $30, $35, so it got to be more and more expensive. Movies were cheaper, they were quicker, and so at that point I made the decision, as I say, you can't serve two masters. I decided to go with the movies to be quicker and easier at that point. So then I basically went full-time into the movies and continued to just go as far as I can in that.
Yeah, see, for me, it was the public library. The library card was my corruptor, because people wouldn't know what I was reading.
Right.
And people that don't read think it's some kind of elegant art.
Mm-hmm.
Like you sit there with a tea. But the reality is, some of the nastiest stuff that I could possibly think of, I got out of books first.
Right. My problem is, being a collector, I have to have it in my collection.
Right, right.
And libraries, no, because they want it back sometimes. So I always want it, and it would go bigger and bigger, and yeah.
Yeah. I got this thing that I like to call the first kiss, and since you have two masters at one point, and first kiss usually is like an early thing that really sparks you. What was your first kiss? It could be literature or film.
Well, literature, when I started getting into the reading, and here's the sad part is, I think in my 4 years of high school, I read maybe 2 books, maybe 1.5, because I didn't want to read what the school was telling me what I needed to read. And it's a sad thing that if they would have encouraged maybe going outside the curriculum, it could have sparked that passion earlier. And I think about all these things that I could have read earlier, but I didn't. But nonetheless, first book that I read when I started working security was Stephen King's Pet Sematary. And that had just come out in paperback. And I can still remember the feeling of certain sequences in the book that really affected me. When little Gage, what happens to him, and it's the start of a chapter, and the event has already happened, and you're like backing up 2 pages going, wait a minute, what did I miss? What happened? What? And also the dream that Lewis has when he wakes up, throws the covers off, and there's dirt and pine needles and stuff in his bed, and being terrified, almost as you watch the movie. So when a written word can have an effect on you like that, it's exhilarating, and you want more. For the movie world, seeing Jaws in the theater, I seen it on a re-release, and I believe it was 1977. So I was 12 years old. It had definitely a traumatic effect on me, enough to, I have not been in a body of water since then, other than a swimming pool or a bathtub. I've been to the ocean twice and went right to the edge, and I refused to go in. I can still vividly describe the nightmares that I had after seeing Jaws. I mean, it had that much of an effect on me. I still love the film to this day, and it's one of my favorites, but I can still watch it and still have that uneasy feeling. It still has an effect on me all these years later. So I think that's the first film. I don't know if that's the first film that had honestly scared me, but that's the first one that terrified me and actually changed my life. You don't forget stuff like that.
Oh, no. Now, when you talk about books, the first Stephen King thing that really freaked me out was The Boogeyman short story.
The short story.
Yeah. Oh, man, that just absolutely destroyed me.
Yeah.
I was scared to death.
I don't think people understand. And if you're a reader, obviously you get it. But how you can read these words and it can build up that emotional hammer that just plummets you, and just over and over again. It's amazing. It really is what your mind can create as you're reading these little words that's building in your brain and that can literally terrify you. It's incredible.
Yeah. So you're an encyclopedia. That's one of the things that's really fun about talking with you. And it's a question I always wanted to ask, but we haven't done it in our little Algonquin round tables that we do. You're pretty good with dates and pretty good about eras. So if we were to start in the 30s, what would be your favorite, or the thing that you would say is a favorite film?
Obviously, it'd be Frankenstein. That is the epitome. I mean, my first tattoo is a series of stitches around my right wrist, and that is in tribute to Frankenstein. I mean, again, as a horror fan, like I mentioned, that resonates with me to my core. That's who we are, and that lost outsider, that child, that grown child that is misunderstood. And if you see horror fans, I mean, obviously at a convention like this, we don't fit in with normal society. Whether it's just a simple black T-shirt or the tattoos and the spiked hair or whatever, and we revel in that. It's come to the point now where we don't want to be the same as the norm. We want to stand on the outside, and we embrace it.
Yeah. About the 40s.
The 40s probably would be Val Lewton and his films, because with the war, you had Universal was on its downfall for the most part, and it was trying to peak up and down like with the Wolfman and stuff, but for the most part it was down. But then you have geniuses like Val Lewton that were taking pennies and crazy titles given to him and then making incredible films.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would have to be Val Lewton.
Okay. 50s?
50s got to be the Giant Monsters. After the war, horror was still out, so we can't make horror films, so we're going to make sci-fi movies about giant monsters destroying cities, which, I hate to tell you, that's a horror film.
Yes.
You can call it what you want, but it's a horror movie. And the 50s did it like nobody else, and they've never replicated what those guys did in the 50s, and not just here, but in Japan, with Godzilla.
Sure. 60s?
60s, you had the how would you call it, the invasion from European films. Hammer was really getting their foothold in the door. They started in the late 50s, but it was really the late 50s, early 60s. And then you also had the influx of the Italian craze with Bava and the Italian European stuff. Started flooding the markets and the drive-ins. So we got to see a whole different perspective of the movie world than what we were used to in the safe comfort of our environment here in the States.
Yeah. How about 70s?
70s, you had kind of like the gloves are off, bucking society, bucking the establishment, downer endings. You had those occasionally before, but the 70s reveled in nothing is safe. And you also had the kind of end of the costume drama, fantasy type horror, more realistic, gritty, real life horrors at home. This could really happen, like with Rosemary's Baby, even though it was in the late 60s, but The Omen, The Exorcist, it was more closer to home and a lot more gritty.
Yeah. 80s?
80s, you had the 80s was the decade of the rubber. You had the makeup effects blew up. Films at the end of the 70s and early 80s, Dawn of the Dead and Friday the 13th, and Tom Savini was really becoming of age. This rubber reality, him and Rick Baker, American Werewolf, The Howling. Makeup was just exploding on the technology of what they could do. And, of course, like anything, Hollywood was exploiting the hell out of that. And we got to see monsters and effects that completely changed our way of thinking. It really became anything was possible. If you had a talented enough crew and some money and creativeness, you could see any type of monster. So, they just took that and ran with it.
Yeah. Now the tough one, the horror wasteland of the 1990s.
Nothing happened in the 90s. Skip that and go back to the 70s or the 60s. The 90s I've said this before to many people, there is no time when you don't have anything good to watch. If you think that what is coming out to the theaters these days is crap, then go backwards. Go back 20 years, 30 years. There's never a point, there's nobody on this planet that has seen everything. So if we ever go through the dry spell of the 90s where there's turning out not a lot of film, that's the time when you go back. But in the 90s, we did have some good stuff. You did have films here and there. It wasn't every week or every month, but there were some decent things. But then, of course, in 96, you had Scream. And that just blew up the slasher genre again, and then it floods the market with all the the rip-offs and the similar as titles. So good for that, but it's one of those things that be careful what you ask for, because I mean, if you look at the cycle, there'll be a dry spot. Someone will create something huge, and then it'll be flooded with remakes and or similar themed movies, where it just dumbs everything down, and then there's that dry spell again, and then something pop will come up and be creative, like Blair Witch Project, and at the end of the 90s, boom, you have all this found footage movies coming over. So it's all cycles.
Yeah, it's so funny that the 90s are like this dead spot, but right after that, and we'll get to the 2000s, we have more branches of horror than I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You have so many different types.
Right.
It's like a big tree.
And also you have the DVDs really come about, and again you have an influx of different countries, French films. Japan was really kicking off in the late 90s with Ringu that exploded. It just all these different countries, and it also became available easier. So it wasn't like even before you had to wait for AIP to import something over here. Through DVDs and import markets and everything else, you could watch these films, you could access these films a lot easier than they were before.
Yeah. 2010s, have you seen anything from 2000 to 2010 that's a different trend?
I think it's, well, in the 2000s and this type of, unfortunately you have a lot of remakes, a lot of sequels, a lot of reimaginings. Mm-hmm. And I will say, as much as I don't like a lot of the remakes, for people out there listening, do not get on the I hate remakes bandwagon. I will agree that a majority of them are not worth our time. But remember, The Thing is a remake. David Cronenberg's Fly is a remake. Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1978 was a remake. There's a lot of films that are remakes that are really good. So as much as maybe 80% of them might not be good, you can't get that blanket screw them all. Because there are talented people that are going to change and give a new look on something that you might not have thought. But unfortunately, when Hollywood's involved, it's tougher and tougher for them, because it is all about making more money as opposed to coming up with something creative. But again, there's a lot of movies out there over the last 10 decades that are going to entertain you.
Yeah. Jon, thanks so much for the time that you gave me, and for the people that are out there listening. Once again, he's the owner, operator, and head corpse of Kitley's Crypt. You can go over to kitleyscrypt.com and read some of his great musings on this. He also does fantastic reviews of soundtracks, which is really a unique thing. I've not seen that very often. Until next time, stay hellbent.
And thanks for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can subscribe to Hellbent for Horror on iTunes and Stitcher, and if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes. It really helps. You can find more on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and I'm on Twitter at Hellbent Horror. You can also find out more info on my website, hellbentforhorror.com. Till next time, stay hellbent.